Before we begin our class tonight, I just want to thank Larry Robbins for a couple weeks ago filling in for me while I was out of town, covering chapter 10, 11, and 12 of Judges, the story of Jephthah. So Larry, thank you. I appreciate you taking that for me. Tonight, we're going to be studying probably the most recognized character, right, in the whole book of Judges. Even people that don't really know the Bible that well, they know Samson, don't they? He's like the guy you think of, right, when you think of Judges. It seems like that's one of the ones that comes to mind. Gideon, maybe another. But it's an interesting study, and one that's going to really take place over 2 weeks. So the other unique thing about Samson, there's a lot of unique things about Samson, but there's 4 chapters devoted to him. The longest that the author provides of any of the stories of the Judges is Samson. And so we'll do chapters 13 through 15, verse 8 this week. And the next week we'll pick up 15:9 all the way through through chapter 16. And so we'll devote 2 weeks to the study. And when we come to the story of Samson, we come to the last cycle of the Judges. Remember we talked about the Judges cycle, how there would be this period where the people of Israel would do evil and they would cry out to the Lord, and then the Lord would send them into captivity. They would cry out to the Lord would send a deliverer, and then there was just this cycle that continues to go on. And so we're in the last cycle as we come to the story of Samson. And he's the final God-appointed leader in the book of Judges. And so we'll go ahead and begin by looking at Judges 13, and we're going to read verse 1. And it says, "Now the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines 40 years. So I got to think about, this is the last cycle of Judges, and this phrase stood out to me, evil in the sight of the Lord, or some of the translations say evil in the eyes of the Lord. And then I thought about a phrase that, and that phrase is mentioned in every cycle of Judges. So it's in chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 6, chapter 10, chapter 13. Israel did evil in the eyes of the Lord. But then I think of one of the phrases that was brought up in our first week about what do you think about Judges? And one of the answers was, everyone did what was right in their own eyes, right? And so that's in chapter 17, verse 6, 21, verse 25. And we'll get to that in the next few weeks. But everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And then then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So we got a lot of eyes going on here, right? Well, which eyes matter? And it got me thinking about that, right? There's a lot of eyes. There's the eyes of the Lord, there's evil, and then the eyes of the people, and they're doing what is right in their own eyes. And it really, to me, stands out a couple things. The truths about sin. When we think about sin, and really that's what's evil in the sight of the Lord. It's not really what we feel is right. Sin is a transgression not of what we feel is right, but what God commands and what God really His will is for us, right? That's what sin is. So there's the definition of sin when we look at whose eyes matter, but there's also the deception of sin. So rationalizations, holding a form of God's will through our own eyes, perception. And so we can read the story of these judges and kind of go through and look at it historically, weigh in on them, think about all the things they should have done. But how about us today? Right? I want us to kind of think about what does this apply in any way to us? I mean, do we rationalize our actions or attitudes based on doing something which is right in God's eyes, but fail to recognize the sins like materialism, like bitterness, pride, selfishness. Some of the things that, we don't really like to look at, those things maybe are right in our own eyes, but they're not necessarily right in God's eyes. And so Mark Twain once said that history never repeats itself, but it often does rhyme. And so I think we see a rhythm, right, a rhyme of this cycle that can continue in our lives. I mean, I think the question we need to ask ourselves is whose eyes matter? And we live in a world, I think that answer is obvious, right? The world around us say, my eyes matter. And we live in that world, and sometimes that attitude can creep into us. So I guess just to start, I want to sort of make that application, be thinking about that as we look at the story of Samson, because we can be fairly critical of Samson and the Israelites. But I want us to kind of also reflect on ourselves. So let's pick up in chapter 13, verse 2. We're going to read verse 2 through verse 7. It says, "There was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and bore no children. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Behold, now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and give birth to a son. Now therefore be careful not to drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. For behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and no razor shall come upon his head. For the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines." Then the woman came to her husband and said, "A man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of an angel of God, very awesome. And I did not ask him where he came from, nor did he tell me his name. But he said to me, Behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and now you shall not drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death." And so one of the things that is a bit obvious, right, in this last cycle of Judges is there's something missing, right? Does anybody see anything missing in this? I mean, let's go back to verse 1, that the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines. And then it talks about the Lord planning to deliver. But is there anything that stands out where something's missing? I'm sorry, what was that, Roger? They didn't cry out. So, do you think there's any significance there? Did the author just sort of forget to put that in? But there's no mention at all of the people crying out for the being given into the hands of the Philistines. So, Dana.
Okay, well, this is just the planning of his birth. So Samson is going to have to be an adult before he can be a judge.
Yes.
So maybe sometime between now and the time that Samson is, 25, 30, however old he has to be, maybe they'll cry out then.
Yes. So let's keep that in mind, right? Because I think as the narrative unfolds, we'll start to maybe see why that's not there. And I'll kind of make the case, I guess, as the class goes on, as to maybe why I see that that's not there. Because like anything in God's Word, I think it's written intentionally. And so if it's not there, it's probably not there for a reason. Micah. Yes, yeah, and I think you're kind of hitting on where I'm going, and let me just kind of make this statement, and then we'll see if this sort of bears out, right? But God, and we see in this whole narrative, God puts into motion a plan for a deliverer a deliverer of Israel without even them asking or wanting deliverance. And so, and one of the fascinating things, and I'm not going to have the time to get into this with this lesson or even the next lesson, but there's a lot of parallels of Samson and Christ, of all people, right? It's interesting when you kind of look at some of the types and antitypes. Not that it's more compare and contrast, right? But there's some things in there that are interesting. And one of them is, think about this, okay? If that is the case, that they're comfortable with living amongst the Philistines, I mean, we're good, right? We're okay. We've gotten to that point. As the nation of Israel continues through the Judges cycle, they continue to decline. And they're just okay living in this captivity. So God puts into motion a deliverer without them even asking or wanting deliverance. Does that sound familiar? Why? Who? That's Jesus Christ, right? Okay. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever would believe in him may not perish but have eternal life. We didn't cry out for that, right? God, even though we didn't ask for it, even though we didn't want it, he provided that for us, right? And that was his plan from eternity. So interesting, just a little bit of a point for us to consider. But we'll look at that more as we get into the lesson. So the angel of the Lord tells Manoah's wife she's barren and that she's going to give birth to a son, and he's to be a Nazirite from the womb. So Numbers chapter 6, verses 1 through 21, talks about the Nazirite vow, a special vow that could be taken voluntarily by anybody. And if they did that, it was really around an intense spiritual focus and devotion to God during this vow period. There were 3 things that you were to do under a Nazirite vow, or not do. You were to keep your hair uncut. You did not drink any product from the vine, and not to have any contact with a dead body. And so those were sort of the vows that you took. And you can read more about that in Numbers chapter 6. So it was a voluntary vow in Numbers, but Samson, interestingly, is born into this vow. His mother is commanded to not eat of anything from the vine, right? To not touch anything unclean. And then he's born into this, and it says he's to stay that way till he dies. So clearly, he's going to be set apart by God. A very special distinction and honor is going to be given to Samson, and one that we really haven't seen before in the scripture. And so that's exciting. I can imagine the parents hearing that and wondering. And so we'll see there's some questions that come up, right? Continuing on in verse 8. Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, O Lord, please let the man of God whom you had sent come to us again and teach us what we are to do for the boy who is to be born. God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she was sitting in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. So the woman ran quickly and told her husband, Behold, the man who came the other day has appeared to me. Then Manoah arose and followed his wife, and when he came to the man, he said to him, Are you the man who spoke to the woman? And he said, I am. Manoah said, Now, when your words come to pass, what shall be the boy's mode of life and his vocation? So he wants some more information, right? What exactly are we supposed to do, right? I mean, you got to give me more information here. And here's the answer the angel gives him. Let the woman pay attention to all that I said. Verse 14, she should not eat anything that comes from the vine, nor drink wine or strong drink, or eat any unclean thing. Let her observe all that I commanded. So Manoah asked the Lord to send this man of God, give us maybe a confirming sign, something, I want some more information. So he doesn't go to Manoah, he goes to his wife. She goes and gets him. He asks the angel, Are you the person that you talked to my wife? And he says, Yes. Manoah wants more information, and I think the angel of the Lord politely tells him, I've given you everything you need, right? So just repeats what was told to the woman. And no further instructions needed, because if it was, I would give it to you, right? So it's interesting. Like any parent, you want more details. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to do this? And even in God's scripture, there's a lot of things God doesn't give us answers to. He gives us principles, but think about all the different things in your life you have to work out based on principles in the scripture. And it would be nice if you could just get everything answered. But it certainly, as parents, we don't get that chance, right, with our kids. And so I think the angel kind of politely says, I've given you everything you need. So just an interesting discourse here, and it'll continue on in verse 15. So then Manoah said to the angel, "Please let us detain you so that we may prepare a young goat for you." The angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "Though you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, then offer it to the Lord." So Manoah did not know that he was an angel of the Lord. Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "What is your name? So that when your words come to pass, we may honor you." But the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" So Manoah took the goat with the grain offering and offered it on the rock to the Lord. And he performed wonders while Manoah and his wife looked on. For it came about, when the flame went up from the altar toward heaven, that the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. When Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell on their faces to the ground. And so we'll continue reading. Let's just read through verse 24. Now the angel of the Lord did not appear to Manoah or his wife again. Then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. So Manoah said to his wife, "We will surely die, for we have seen God." But his wife said to him, "If the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering from our hands, nor would he have shown us all these things, nor would he have let us hear things like this at this time." So the woman gave birth to a son and named him Samson, and the child grew up, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him in Madon between Zol and Eshtaol. So Manoah has more requests, right? I've got questions, now I've got a request. Stay here, let me feed you. And the angel's like, "Look, don't feed me, I don't want your food, but if you want to make an offering to the Lord, that's great." And he asks him a name. He wants to honor him. When these things come to pass, I want to honor you. And so the angel makes this interesting statement, right? Why do you ask me my name, seeing that it's wonderful? Did anybody have anything else other than wonderful in their translation? Beyond understanding, right? So you don't even know what you're asking is pretty much what's happening there. Because wonderful, like what I mean, you telling me you're just awesome, wonderful, but no, wonderful to the point you don't understand. You don't need to know my name. You don't even know what you don't know, right? I'm an angel of the Lord, and I'm just here on behalf of the Lord. That's all that matters. And I'm giving you instructions. And then he goes up into the flame, kind of that confirming sign, right? We saw that with Gideon too. And so Manoah kind of freaks out, right? We're going to die. And so there's consciousness of the fact that you can't see God and live, right? So that's part of the teachings of the law and what Moses had kind of talked about and knew. So there's this consciousness of God, but more like in a fear. And then his wife sort of corrects him and is the one that has some wisdom. So it's interesting. The man of God, the angel, goes to the wife, and the wife is the only one he really talks to until she gets Manoah. Manoah, asks all these pestering questions. And then Manoah's kind of, woe is us, right? He doesn't really kind of get it. And so I did ask a question in the handout here. Do you see any difference between the faith of Manoah and the faith of his wife? Just curious what your thoughts are. Do you see any difference, Nolan?
Her faith is without question.
Yes.
She's not questioning anything.
Yeah.
As far as with the angel, she's willing to do what is expected of her without asking a bunch of, as you put it, pestering questions.
Yeah. It's like she gets it, right? And she even points out a very, very awesome, like an angel of the Lord. I mean, she sort of recognized that where it says he didn't know. So it's just interesting how the author presents this. And this child grows up. He's blessed by the Lord. The Spirit of the Lord begins to stir in him. So it's interesting, the unique characteristics about Samson. So here's a few, right? His parents are called, not him, right? Normally the judges, they're called to be a deliverer. All of a sudden, the message comes from God. that your son, who's not yet born, and I'm going to miraculously conceive him because you're barren, he's going to be the deliverer. So that's completely unique to any of the story of Judges. And again, a bit like the miraculous conception of Jesus, right, in a different way. But the Nazirite vow, from before he was born, that started with his mother. She took that, and I'm no doubt she took that seriously, and she did that, right? She fulfilled that vow, and then he was born into that. He's blessed by the Lord growing up. The Spirit of the Lord stirred within him. All of these things that are unique. And if anyone is perfectly positioned to be a special deliverer of the nation of Israel, it's Samson. Think about all the things that line up, right? All of these unique characteristics that he's born into. And so that's where we leave at chapter 13. So he's perfectly positioned to be a very special judge. And then we kind of get to chapter 14, and we see how things unfold, right? So let's look at chapter 14. It starts to pick up as he reaches adulthood. And so we'll read verses 1 through 4, chapter 14. Then Samson went down to Timnah, and he saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. So he came back and told his father and mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me as a wife. Then his father and his mother said to him, Is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives or all of our people that you go take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she looks good to me. Interesting, right? So, verse 4. However, his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. Now at that time, the Philistines were ruling over Israel. So another awesome thing about this story is God is in control, right? And he uses people in different ways. And he'll even use Samson in his kind of Canaanite behavior, right? The way he sort of acts. But we'll see sort of at the end, right? We sort of know the end, that there's a bit of redemption. Yes, go ahead.
Does Samson know that is Samson that decides he's seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines, or is he unaware of that and it's God doing that?
It's God. I mean, I think that his parents are distressed. So think about this. They've had this angel of the Lord. You don't forget that, right?
Right.
He made this awesome appearance, and this Nazirite vow the mother made, and you have all this promise for your son. He's going to be this great deliverer, and we know it's going to be awesome. And all of a sudden he says, I'm going to go marry a Philistine woman. You go, wait a minute, you're supposed to deliver their people from the Philistines, not marry them, right? So imagine their distress. I think that's what's going on. They're like, no. You know, take somebody amongst the people here, because you can't do that. Yes.
You also would think that this man is going to have incredible character, and so he's going to choose someone based on something other than she's real cute.
He's special. He's been set apart.
It is, right. And he sees her, he says, I like the way she looks, go get her, that's all. I want her because of how she looks.
Yeah.
You would expect somebody who's a Nazarite to say, what kind of qualities does she have? Then you
Sure.
look at the Philistines.
So certainly as parents, right, we sometimes our kids do things that we're really thrilled about, right? So I can kind of feel a little bit for the parents here, like you're messing everything up, Jane.
My version said, get her for me, she is right in my eyes.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, right in my eyes. So there's another set of eyes, right? The Lord's eyes, Israelites' eyes, Samson's eyes, right? He's looking at really one thing, and she's very attractive. And so, but it's kind of interesting when we look. God's going to use Samson's weakness of being impulsive and unteachable, right? We're going to kind of see that because he didn't really listen to his parents. They're trying to tell him, no, you shouldn't marry somebody that's a Philistine, and they can't teach him, right? And you'll see this. They don't really control him. He's certainly impulsive. But God's going to use that behavior to bring the needed division between the nation of Israel and the Philistines. Because as we kind of read through this story, you'll see that they're way too comfortable with being around the Philistines. And God has to introduce a deliverer to stir up strife between this group and divide and put a wedge between them. And that's going to be Samson's purpose. And he does it pretty well. He stirs up some trouble, right? And so we'll read about how he carries out God's plan, right? To divide these people, even though they didn't want it. God sees that they need to, otherwise he's going to lose his nation. They're just going to meld into this group, right? So let's pick up chapter 14, verse 5. Then Samson went to Timnah with his father and mother and came as far as the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came roaring toward him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, so that he tore him as one tears a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. I mean, you think about that, a lion, right? Charging at you, the strength to grab it and tear it to pieces with your hands. I mean, that's amazing, right? That's pretty awesome. I can't imagine seeing that. And it certainly wasn't him, it was the Spirit of the Lord. But that's the gift that he was given through that Spirit, was this strength. And he tore it to pieces, like you would tear a baby goat. You could just grab it. But he didn't tell his mother or father what he had done. Verse 7, so he went down and talked to the woman, his prospective wife, and she looked good to Samson. When he returned later to take her, he turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the body of the lion. So what you would think normally are flies and maggots, right, in a carcass. But here's this hive of bees and honey. And so I'm sure it caught his attention. And so what does he do? Verse 9, so he scraped the honey into his hands and went on, eating it as he went. And when he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they ate it. But he did not tell them that he had scraped honey out of the body of a lion. And so, is there any significance in this, right? This is kind of a weird... There you go, right? So right away, right, Dave? It's like, oh, wait a minute. If you take your vow seriously as a Nazirite, you would know that's a completely voluntary act, right? I mean, it's not like sometimes you might accidentally come into contact with a body, and maybe you go to the priest and you go through the rituals of being clean, and maybe pray to the Lord or whatever. But this is a very intentional. Like, I'm going to go get some honey, right? Is there a hand over here, Clay?
Not so much dead, but it was an unclean animal.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
He could touch a dead animal. I mean, obviously, when they're sacrificing animals, but an unclean animal.
Yeah.
He was not supposed to.
So, there's a bit of a disregard, right, for that vow that we start to see. But then, it's kind of taken another step. A disregard for his vow, but kind of a disregard for his parents. In what way?
He didn't tell them what it was, where it came from.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have eaten that if they had known where that came from.
First of all, it's gross, right?
Gross.
but that's unclean, right? So he doesn't really care about passing that on to them, right? I don't really care. We kind of see an unteachable, impulsive, kind of self-centered person, right, starting to develop. And there's honey. It looks good. I'm going to take it. And I've got some extra here. You guys want some? I'm not going to tell you where it came from. But and we see this play out, obviously, in the riddle that he's going to kind of propose here in a bit. But it says in verse 10, then his father went down to the woman, and Samson made a feast there. For the young men customarily did this. When they saw him, the Philistines, they brought him 30 companions to be with him. So he goes to the town of the woman. I guess they customarily have this wedding feast. And they bring these 30 companions to be with him. And so it's interesting. I don't know that those are necessarily his friends. It's probably people watching over Samson, right? Let's keep an eye on this guy. So 30 people that kind of keep an eye on him. And Samson probably recognizes that's what their purpose is. And so he's going to have some fun with it, right? So he says, okay, in verse 12. Then Samson said to them, let me now propound a riddle to you. If you indeed tell it to me within 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes. But if you are unable to tell me, then you shall give me 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes. And they said to him, propound your riddle, that we may hear it. And he said to them, out of the eater comes something to eat, out of the strong comes something sweet. But they could not tell the riddle in 3 days. So he thinks he's got something that they can never figure out, right? Here's this unique situation where there's a beehive and a carcass of a lion. So I'm going to make a riddle around that. There's no way. And I'm going to, these clowns, I'm going to get some money out of them, right? I'm going to kind of play with them a little bit here. And so I think that's his motive, right? He's thinking these guys are an easy mark. They take it, and so they can't tell his riddle. And so he's kind of probably feeling pretty good about himself. And then we read on, right? Verse 15. So it came about on the 4th day that they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband so that he will tell us the riddle, or we will burn you and your father's house with fire. So, they kind of blackmail her, right? And so she's in a tough spot. All kinds of great behavior on both sides here. But have you invited us to impoverish us? Is this not so? So Samson's wife wept before him and said, you only hate me, and you do not love me. You have propounded a riddle to the sons of my people and have not told it to me. And he said to her, behold, I have not told it to my father or mother. Should I tell you? So, she plays the game, right? You don't love me. If you loved me, you would tell me, right? So the classic. And he's like, well, I love my parents and I didn't even tell them. And it's a bit disingenuous. Does he really love his parents? I mean, I don't know. Not from what I see. He thinks that I can kind of throw that out there. Like, I didn't even tell my parents. So, there's no reason to tell you. We're not even married yet. So, anyway, that's his answer. But it doesn't really stick, right? And so, it says in verse 17, however, she wept before him 7 days while their feast lasted. So, probably didn't go too well for Samson, right? Because, what should be a time of joy, you've got his, prospective wife just crying all the time, and it's all kinds of problems. And Janine.
Verse 15, did you say the 4th day?
Then it came about on the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, yeah.
Mine says the 7th.
Oh, really? Yeah, I'm reading New American Standard. Anybody, does it say 4th or 7th or?
15, it came to pass on the 7th day.
Okay, yeah.
Mine says they came to him on the 4th day.
Interesting.
Her on the 4th day to try and get it to tell him, and she went 7 days before he promised.
Yeah, but on the 7th day, sort of the 11th hour, right? He breaks down. So she wept before him 7 days, and then on the 7th day he told her, because she pressed him so hard. So here's strong Samson, right? And he's worn down by a woman, and we'll see that later. She told the riddle to the sons of the people. So the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, all right? They're going to play with him, right? Okay, we'll let you think you're going to win. And then right before the sun goes down, okay, here we go, right? What is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion? And so Samson knew, like, okay, right? Okay, I know what you did. And so we'll see how he reacted. He says, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. Okay, so that's an interesting So, we look at that and say, okay, that's pretty disparaging, right? In English, well, it's actually very disparaging in Hebrew, right? When you look at that, that's a very disparaging comment toward his wife, right? So he's insulting her, and he's telling them, you guys are cheaters. And my wife, you plowed with my heifer.
But she betrayed him.
Yeah, but they were under the threat of getting burned with their family. So everybody's just like doing what is right in their own eyes, right? Everybody's just trying. That's what you get. That's what a lot of this story is everybody doing what's right in their own eyes. And God sort of just, okay, I'll use your propensity to do what's right in your own eyes to accomplish my goal, which is to cause division and strife between you people. So, yes.
So at the end of 7 days, they are now married, correct?
I don't know. What is sort of the custom? I don't know if they're... Yeah, I mean, it talks about wife, so I'm supposing they're married, so at some point I don't really know, is it...
They've been partying for 7 days, and now she's his wife, and his
Yeah.
thing that he says about her is like heifer.
Yeah, and then it goes on to say, it ends that his wife was given to a friend, so there probably was that official recognition. Yeah, a Springer, right? Yeah, a Springer heifer, come on. Yeah. It's better than a coal cow, right? Yeah. So. Okay, I got Larry, go ahead.
A heifer was what was used to plow with.
Yeah.
We're taking 21st century comments and
Yeah.
putting them back in that time, and that's not necessarily fair. Because one of the side notes I have is,
Mm-hmm.
and it is true, a heifer is what was used to plow. You use your own animal to plow with.
Mm-hmm.
But what he's saying is, you used my animal to plow with.
Yeah, okay.
It's not necessarily a derogatory remark. He's simply saying, you made use of something you shouldn't have used.
Sure, okay. Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, and but certainly not complimentary of his wife. And even in that sense, I mean, I think it's really just like, it's not fair, right? It's focused on me. And then we see sort of his disregard for his wife. As we read on, so he says that, and then in verse 19 it says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily. Here comes the Spirit of the Lord. He went down to Ashkelon. He killed 30 of them, took their spoil, their clothes, and he gave the change of clothes to those who told the riddle. And his anger burned, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, for he had been his friend. So he kind of just walks out and leaves her, I guess thinking, and we'll see, I'll come back later, right? I'll come back later for her. But he kind of makes a mockery of everything, right? Okay, I'll give you your 30 clothes. I'll just go out and kill 30 people, and then here you go. So it's not going to cost me anything, and I'm going to take 30 of your lives, right, Roger?
Yeah, in verse 15, on that fourth day, they said to Samson's wife, he's already married to her at that time.
Okay, yeah. So,
Already married, and then obviously they threatened with her family, that, she betrayed, so she was worried about her family,
okay, yeah. No, that's a good point. And so, yeah, they're married, okay, and he's kind of at this point where I'm going to just walk away. Well, there was some hands up over here. Clay, go ahead.
Yeah, and back to the term cows, I mean, that was used by Amos, of the women of Bashan whose husbands were fleecing the poor people. So it was a derogatory term in one sense, because Samson's wife, gave him up to her.
Sure. There's just a lot of bad behavior, right, that we see playing out. And again, I think God is trying to use this to accomplish his will. Dan, did you have your hand up?
I don't think they're married. I know it refers to wife, but during the betrothal, they refer to as husband and wife, even though they haven't consummated the marriage.
Well, let's pick up in chapter 15.
Yeah, when you get there, then I think that explains it.
Yeah, so then in fact, 15 verse 1, but after a while, in the time of the wheat harvest, Samson visited his wife with a young goat. and said, I will go into my wife, into her room. But her father did not let him enter. So I think after a while, he's like, hey, I was a little, hot-headed there. Maybe I just need to bring a nice young goat and make things good, right? My bad, I'm sorry. And so he goes to see his wife, and it says her father did not let her enter. Verse 2, her father said, I really thought that you hated her intensely, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please let her be yours instead. So here's another kind of ridiculous, offer, right? He's going to give up his other daughter to this Samson, right? Who's not really proven to be a very honorable guy. But I think he's a little afraid, like maybe he's going to kill me, right? This guy's pretty tough, right? So maybe this is his way of trying to work through that. But Samson's reaction was pretty interesting. He said to them, this time I shall be blameless in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. So he's upset, right? And I'm going to be blameless. In his eyes, he's blameless, right? So you gave away my wife, and you didn't ask me, so now I'm going to take revenge. So we see this interesting story. Samson went and caught 300 foxes, or jackals, some translations say. And he took torches, and he turned the foxes tail to tail and put one torch in the middle between the two tails. And I keep thinking in my mind, how did he do that, right? And keep everything. I mean, it's one thing to be strong, but how do you do that, right? How do you orchestrate that? I don't understand. No doubt he did it. But when he had set fire to the torches, he released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines, thus burning up both stalks of standing grain and with the vineyards and groves. So he caused a lot of problems for them. So you're starting to see, like, hey, there's now starting to be some problems, right? It's not just personal, one against the other. It's becoming a nation thing, right? You're destroying our crops. And so it says in verse 6, the Philistines said, who did this? And they said, Samson, son-in-law of the Temanite, because he took his wife and gave her to his companion. So they're kind of saying, well, he did it because this guy gave his daughter away. And that's why he's mad, and that's why he did it. So what did the Philistines do? So here's their solution. They came and burned her and her father with fire. They don't want to take on Samson, right? But we'll just go and burn her and burn her father, right?
The original threat.
Yeah, and so who are the kind of the innocent party, right? I mean, he's kind of, but that's the product of everybody doing what's right in their own eyes. It's kind of a crazy story, but that's their solution. So they think by doing that, Samson will be good with it. Well, that didn't work out so well. Verse 7, then Samson said to them, since you act like this, I will surely take revenge on you. But after that, I'll quit. So, sure. Isn't that how revenge goes, right? Because that, after this, we're good. I'm not going to do anything else. Until you do something, then I'm going to do something. And so he struck them ruthlessly with a great slaughter and went down and lived in the cleft of the rock of Etam. And so here's this, kind of interesting story that plays out. And we'll pick up in verse 9 next week. But I just want to conclude with this thought. Samson had the Spirit of the Lord, right? He had this great gift of strength. And how does that compare with the fruit of the Spirit, right, in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23? So it's interesting, right? Both come from the Spirit. One is the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, characteristics. The other is a gift of the Spirit, which is strength. And in the early church, there were gifts of the Spirit, right? And certain people had gifts, and they would use them. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the chapter on love, Paul talks about this. He starts out in verse 1 by saying, if I speak with tongues of men and of angels, but I do not have love, I become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and I know all mysteries and all knowledge and I have all truth so as to remove mountains, but I do not, or have all faith so as to remove mountains, but I do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but I do not have love, it profits me nothing. So I can have these gifts or these honorable things that are there, as a result of the Spirit. But if I don't have love, right, they really don't mean anything. And certainly we don't see love as a characteristic of Samson, certainly love of God. So for us, I just think it's interesting to sort of compare that, right? A gift of the Spirit. We all have gifts. I don't know necessarily maybe of the Spirit, but we all have abilities, talents. And how do we use those, right? Those are, I think, gifts from God. And do those necessarily define us, or those are the fruits of what the Spirit is really define us? Is that what's pleasing to God? What we do with those gifts are important, but if they're not done with love, they really don't mean anything, right? So I just wanted to conclude with that. Just a little bit of a different, take on what we've been looking at. So we'll conclude. Next week, we'll look at Judges chapter 15. We'll pick up at verse 9, and then we'll go all the way through the 16th chapter. So go ahead and read those, and then there'll be some material out Sunday for next week. So any comments before we dismiss? Anything? Yes, Carol.
So far, all the judges that we've studied, when they went to attack the oppressor, they gathered an army.
Yes.
We see Samson gathering 200 foxes instead of 200.
Interesting. Yeah. In fact, the other unique thing about him is he's really the only judge that really conquered. He never had an army. He just did everything himself, right? So another sort of interesting characteristic. There was one other. Yeah, Mike.
I think it's unique because you see this man, if we're standing aside looking through the story, but it's wow, the Lord is still with him despite everything.
Yeah.
To me, that shows the patience of God.
And
Despite his behavior and situation.
And that's where I really look forward to next week, to bring this back, right? Sort of the redemption of Samson and the redemption of us and how we can be like him, right? And the love and patience of God. So it's an amazing story. So, okay, that's it. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.